Hello, I'm ELD, and these are all the blue cards from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Pre-release is this weekend as of the recording of this video, and we are taking a first look at all of these cards. These are my first impressions of everything. And starting out here, we've got Bait Hook Angler, 2 mana, 2 power creature with Disturb. Disturb is going to be a recurring theme here where you can play the card from your graveyard for its transformed for its disturb cost. So it starts out as a 2/1 and then it comes out as a 1/2 flyer. And most of these disturb cards, if not all of them, are going to have the, when it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So this side, if it's already transformed and it dies, but of course if you discard when it's face up, then you're going to have the chance to play it this way. So really interesting mechanic, and getting some extra value here out of a 2 power creature for 2, which is going to be the building block of many pre-release pools. Backside is acceptable, if not super exciting. A 1/2 flyer is certainly going to be able to get past 1/1 flyers, no problem. Component collector, if it's neither day nor night, becomes day, and whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you can tap or untap target non-land permanent. A 3 mana 1/4, and this one I am not excited about. This seems like one of the weaker cards that we've seen so far. 1 power for 3. This is just too cute for your pre-release pool, and switching from night to day is not the easiest thing to have control over. Consider 1 blue. You can look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard and you draw a card. That's an interesting card right there. I mean, that is not quite sleight of hand. But yeah, it's not bad. I'll take it. There's definitely decks that would be happy to play that, and I'd imagine this would be more for constructed, mind you, not super exciting and limited. But there are reasons to care about casting cards, getting cards into the graveyard. Going to be a hand trip. Wouldn't be surprised at all to see constructed play. Putting a card to the graveyard is, for those that may be newer to the game, generally much better than putting a card on the bottom of your library. May feel like you're losing that card, but generally your graveyard is a resource for most powerful decks. Getting cards there will either allow you to use them somehow or use them in delving or whatever benefit you get from utilizing your graveyard. It's a very common element of powerful constructed decks. Covetous Castaway. For 2, we've got a 1/3. When it dies, you mill 3. And it's got the disturb of becoming, wow, 5 for a 3/4 flyer. And enters the battlefield, you may shuffle up to 3 cards from your graveyard into your library. That's a complicated card because the backside of that is very strong. Front side, not very exciting. I actually don't know what to make of this card. That's a really complicated one. I am totally torn on this one. Oh, yeah, that backside, man. Just getting a 3/4 flyer out of your graveyard for 5. That is going to win you a lot of games of limited, but that front side is regrettable. 1 power creature for that type of investment is just not generally how you're going to manage to get things done. I'd imagine this is going to be similar to a common theme that we'll see is field decks are going to be less reliable, drafts, which are going to be less reliable than constructed. That card feels like it's going to be way too weak constructed. However, for draft, it may actually be really interesting. We've got Cursive Surveillance here, a 5 casting cost aura that enchants a player, and at the beginning of their upkeep, any number of target players other than that player draws cards equal to the number of curses attached to them. So as you're loading up curses on your opponent, you're going to be providing card drawing. I mean, that's gross. A gross looking card. I don't know that curses as a deck would. There's Cursive Misfortunes, which can tutor up curses, and perhaps it sees a one of in the Legacy Curses deck. Would not surprise me. Delver of Secrets. In his darkest hour, he now gets a reprint. So Delver is kind of still the name of the best deck in Legacy by many metrics. The blue-red is it aggro deck in Legacy is incredibly strong, but it's increasingly leaning towards Ragavan, Murktide Regent, Dragon's Rage Channeler, more so than the original Delver itself. And now he's getting a reprint in Standard, and I guess that also means in Pioneer. And we'll see what he's able to do in those formats. He's not going to be nearly as good without all of Brainstorm and Ponder and all of the library manipulation that we see in older formats. But here he is, new art to choose from. Kind of has a Birdman feel to the art on the back. That 3/2 flyer for 1 blue. It's back. Devious Cover Up, 4 mana to counter a spell. That is a lot to counter a spell. If it's countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. And shuffle up to 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library. Not going to be a fan of this one. Responding to your opponent with 4 mana spells is clunky and awkward. Generally, you want your counter spells to be more nimble and to potentially win a counter battle. Shuffling 4 cards, not particularly exciting either. I'm not impressed with that. Dissipate, a reprint here, counter target spell, and you can exile it. Again, nothing super exciting here. Your 3 mana counter spell is just on the line of playability for even casual commander. I have seen Dissipate played in casual commander, but as you get the higher power level, there's just so many good counter spells to compete with. When you're talking about eternal formats, of course, you start with your free counters like Force of Will, Force of Negation. Then you have your 1 mana counters, and depending on which colors you're talking about, those can include Veil of Summer, Pyroblast. So, I mean, this card's going to be way down on the list in terms of counter spells, and you can only play so many in your commander deck. But, kind of casual commander decks may enjoy this card. It's certainly not going to be expensive in terms of dollar value. Have another counter spell. Drown Yard Amalgam, 5 casting costs, 3/6. Enters the battlefield, target player mills 3, and you can pay 3. Make it so it can't be blocked this turn. That is a lot of mana as an investment. We'll see how the format ends up playing out, but 5 mana is a lot for the body. The breakthrough is certainly welcome. The question of whether or not this is actually going to be good enough. And the mill aspect, I don't know. I didn't. We started with white. I didn't see any type of engine to be flickering things in and out, so it doesn't seem like this is going to be able to actually beat somebody by milling them out. See, perhaps as a mid-range strategy that'll be solid enough, but this feels like it's going to be slow to me. Fading Hope, 1 blue, return target creature to its owner's hand. If its mana value is 3 or less, you scry 1. So we have an unsummon that is strictly better than unsummon, of course. And you get to potentially scry if you're hitting a smaller creature. This one's interesting. Unsummon effects, generally not as good as removal. However, the scry one does potentially help balance this out. It'll depend on the prevalence of enchantments and similar things. If you're going to be breaking up a devastating pump effect with this, you're going to feel really good about it, especially if you get the scry. For example, your opponent goes to creature +3/+3 and indestructible. Just remove it from the board for that turn. You're not falling behind in card advantage as you've traded your unsummon for their pump spell and potentially getting a scry out of the mix for only 1 mana. This one's going to depend. It's potentially a non-embarrassing late. We're talking 23rd card for your lineup or 40th card, depending on how you conceptualize that. I'm talking about your 23rd non-land card. Falcon Abomination, 3 mana, 2/2 flyer. All right. When it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 black zombie token with decay. Wow. All right. Fair enough. This is not bad. Zombie bird, 2/2 flyer, gets an extra body on the ground, which is going to die once after it attacks. You get 1 attack step with it. That seems totally fine for pushing through for that final wave. Of course, if you have any type of sack outlets or anything, this is, I like that. Firmament Sage, 4 casting cost 2/3. Going to make it day, and whenever it becomes day or night, you draw a card. Of course, it starts the cycle. It doesn't, if it's already day, that doesn't matter. If it's night, it won't make it day. So this clause is on a lot of things. I'm surprised they didn't give that a keyword. It would have helped the set review. Probably saved a few minutes as we're doing the review. The D&D set, I thought, did a good job of that, with keywords for like every mechanic. A potential draw engine there. As night turns to day, you're getting extra card draws, but a forecasting cost 2/3 does not feel good to me in limit. Generally, you're not going to be able to rely on the day-night shenanigans. It's just not great stat lines compared to the mana value. Flip the switch, 3 mana, counter target spell unless the controller pays 4, and you're going to get a 2/2 body, decay on it. Even with the 2/2 body, I'm not very excited about that. That is almost certainly an actual hard counter. Most of the time, able to counter the spell. 4 is an awful lot to pay, and you're not likely to be in a situation where you want to counter a spell, have 4 to pay for it. But that said, that's generally not where you want to be. Sealed deck, as countering spells is a very reactive strategy that can potentially force you to leave mana open for several turns, not get effective use. If there's a ton of flash creatures, that would certainly be different, but we haven't really seen that to be the case yet. We've got Gale Drifter, a flying 3/2 with Disturb, so 3/2 flyer for 4 is acceptable. And then on the backside, we've got a 2/2 flyer. That's just a reasonable assault from the air. You can attack until they finally trade. If they get another body in front of it, you're going to be able to get a 2/2 flyer to continue the aerial assault. And, paying 5 for a 2/2 flyer out of the graveyard, I mean, you're going to do it in limited. Like, at some point, you're going to have the mana in all likelihood. It's not the most aggressive strategy. It's not like you're necessarily looking to set up a Faithless Looting into a 5 mana 2/2, but that is certainly extra value that'll be appreciated in the pre-release pool. Geistwave, got 2 to return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If you controlled that permanent, draw a card. So that's an interesting bounce effect that can potentially counter removal while allowing you to draw an extra card. That one might see some type of constructed low-level play, but 2 mana is a lot for that type of effect. It's a little... That one's interesting. Anything that says draw a card, you should keep an eye on. Those can generally surprise you. Grafted Identity, very disturbing art. A 4 casting cost aura. As an additional cost, you sack a creature, and what you do is you enchant the creature, control that creature's traditional control magic. It gives the creature +1/+1, and has a sack requirement. 4 mana to steal a creature historically has been very, very good in limited. The fact that you have to sack a body, not nearly as good, but it does pump it up. So you got some type of token generation, this could be fine. Also, we've seen all of those decay cards that give you a 2/2 zombie with decay. I'm not sure what we're calling those yet, but those tokens definitely one of the more expendable options for an effect like this. Larder Zombie, 1 casting cost, 1/3 with Defender. You tap 3 untapped creatures you control to look at the top card of your library. Put it into your graveyard. Trying to get that jar open. Brain in the jar. It's fun art. I mean, how can you deny it? The guy's missing an arm. He's trying to get a brain in a jar. I don't know if we've ever really thought about how tantalizing that would be to zombies to have a brain in a jar. Hid in a candy store. Liar, Disciple of the Drowned. We've got a 5 casting cost, 3/4. Spells can't be countered. So that's a global effect for everyone. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. That has Commander written all over it. Very interesting. Yeah, we don't see effects like that very much anymore. It feels like most of the time this type of card would say your spells can't be countered. But this is just straight up spells cannot be countered. I mean, I expect that to be a card that some people will really enjoy in Commander. 5 is quite a bit for a 3/4. The flashback is kind of a permanent Yawgmoth's Will. So wouldn't be surprising for people to be able to make very degenerate things happen with this card, though 5 is a bit more than you want to spend. Of course, it is a creature, and there are a lot of ways to cheat those into play as well. So that's an interesting card. A lot of power, not clear exactly how that would be. Can't defend it with counter spells because your counter spells aren't going to stop your opponent's stuff. Locked in the Cemetery, 2 casting cost aura. When it enters the battlefield, if there are 5 or more cards in your graveyard, you tap Enchanted Creature, and Enchanted Creature doesn't untap, period. So this is just kind of classic removal with a little bit of a twist. We've seen these type of enchantments throughout so many formats, and this will, effectively stop your opponent's creatures. Now, we saw that bounce spell previously, that if it targets your own permanent, you draw a card. That type of card is devastating against that type of effect. If there's a bunch of enchantments that will stop your opponent's permanents, having a bounce spell that returns that permanent to your hand and draws you a card, which redeploy that original threat, which was such a problem they targeted it in the first place, you're going to be in really good shape. So these type of effects generally amongst the weakest possible removal, because your opponent can potentially find an answer to it down the line, or just get more value. For example, if they have to sacrifice a creature, they'll just end up sacking the creature that has the enchantment on, making it much worse than just like destroy target creature, for example. Malevolent Hermit, 2 casting, cost 2/1. You can pay a blue and sack them to counter target non-creature spell unless the controller pays 3. This would be right at home in Azami if I still had that built-in commander. I had a mono blue Azami with Mind Over Matter and Time Twister, Gush. I had a lot of fun with that deck. This would definitely be another wizard for that. Just 2 mana and mana leak tacked on. And we've got Disturb on top of it. Let's see what the backside is. Non-creature spells you control can't be countered. Wow. Yeah, he would definitely see play in that deck. He disturbs for how much? 3? Yeah. I mean, if there's any Azami players out there, this guy, I can't imagine not making the cut in that deck. He's a wizard on both sides. He's going to make non-creature spells you control can't be countered. As I previously said, that other effect, making all spells so they can't be countered, is a little surprising that it wasn't one-sided. That's what they tend to do, as we see here with this Benevolent Geist. Yeah, that card's very interesting. Gonna potentially discard a Mind Over Matter and just pop him out of the graveyard to make your combo finish uncounterable. Yikes. Memory Deluge. We've got a 4 casting cost instant. You're going to top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. 2 of them into your hand. The rest on the bottom random order. So if you pay 4, you're going to look at 4, put 2 in your hand, the rest on the bottom, and it has flashback. 7. Wow. Well, this card's totally fine. Yeah, this is like a fact or fiction. Looking at 4, putting 2 into your hand. Literally fact or fiction. This card's going to be probably very strong in standard. Flashback for 7. Wow. That is really interesting. Also, the fact that it doesn't work with omniscience or any type of things that make it so you cast this spell for free is an interesting thing to consider in terms of how degenerate it would be. But just for traditional draw go magic, this is one of the more dangerous cards that we've seen. Generating card advantage, really solid way, and then having the ability to flash it back after. Wow, this one's, I would not be surprised if that ends up like dominating standard. Mysterious Tome, 3 casting cost, book, pay 2, tap it, draw a card, and then form it. And we're going to have that turn in. Wait, is this the backside? Oh no, where'd it go? I don't know where the backside of this card is. I'm going to dig it up for you guys. There we go. Chilling Chronicle. The other side of the card is an artifact. You pay 1, tap it to tap target non-land permanent, and then it transforms. So you're getting an extra card draw every other turn. That card's actually pretty difficult to evaluate. I mean, I guess I end up playing it if I play blue. Like, you're getting extra cards out of it, and you're kind of messing with your opponent's potential attack steps. Yeah, I guess I play it and find out pre-release weekend if I'm in blue. So far, not sure. But I definitely would need some impressive cards to be yet to be revealed, to be super sold on blue out of the gates. But we're going to do all of the colors here and weigh in. Nebulgast Intruder. 3 casting cost, 2/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, up to 1 creature opponent controls gets -2/-0 until end of turn. All right, I mean, that one's certainly a strong one at uncommon. The flash and flying for a 2/1 flyer. For 3, already really good, but the fact that you're going to potentially really mess up a combat step makes that card half a removal spell. I mean, very common for 2/2s to clash. So if I go a turn 1, 2/2, a turn 2, 2/2, you do as well. And then I was on the play, so I get to attack into yours with 3 mana open. I mean, that's a disaster. At the very least, I'm going to... I mean, yeah, it's a nightmare, right? Like, that's a total disaster. If you block, I KO your guy. If you don't block and then you try and attack me, then I can just flash this guy in and shrink your guy and block. I mean, this is going to wreak havoc on the early turns. And this one's actually, I really think this card's excellent for the pre-release. I'm very impressed with that for how most games I end up playing in pre-releases end up going. Generally, you're talking about really contesting the board early, and that is going to be an absolute mess if your opponent's playing that game with you. Ominous Roost, 3 casting cost enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, or whenever you cast a blue spell from your graveyard, you get a 1/1 burb, and the creature can only block creatures with flying. So you get a 1/1 flyer, can't block ground and pounders, and yeah, that's probably going to be really tough to make work for your pre-release pool. Again, we've got that hierarchy where this is more easily done in a constructed format. You know, Commander, you could certainly make this work way more easily with things like with retrace from the graveyard, for example. Are there blue retrace cards, or are those just Golgari? All the ones that come to mind are Golgari. Maybe that's a Golgari mechanic. It's got to be a blue. I'm going to look that up. Yeah, there is Una's Grace, which allows you to draw a card for 3 mana as an instant. And of course, there's Wrenn and 6, which gives instants and sorceries in your graveyard retrace. So there's the possibility of assembling that contraption, but the payoff is not spectacular. You're just getting 1/1 birds that cannot block. We've got Organ Hoarder here, a 4 casting cost 3/2 when it ETBs. You look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You've certainly paid more for worse. 4 mana for a 3/2 that replaces itself. I'd say that one's very likely to be a core building block of blue sealed decks, as you're essentially placing itself and getting cards into the graveyard, which are potentially going to have additional utility from the bin, such as bringing them back, or any other type of effects we may discover as we go. Otherworldly Gaze, a flashback card that you're potentially happy to put into the bin. You're going to look at the top 3 cards of your library, put any number of them into your graveyard, and the rest back on top, any order. I'm going to immediately retract the previous statement. I don't think this is the type of card that you're likely to play. This is 1 blue to mill yourself. Now, in constructed, there's the possibility that this is just fine. 1 blue to just mill yourself 3. With the flashback, I mean, there's some possibility that that's going to be worth playing in some type of deck that would enjoy playing Stitcher Supplier or any of the crabs, for example. Hedron Crab or Ruin Crab. The new one that's not as good, that can't target yourself. So, yeah, this one, immediately walking that statement back. I don't imagine that this card's going to be worth the card slot in the deck itself or the card drawn for turn, that you're going to really get the proper value out of that. That is my guess. Certainly not in your pre-release. Overwhelmed Archivist. We've got a 3 casting cost 3/2. ETBs, draw a card, and then discard a card. Again, potentially works with your disturb and flashback cards. A 3 power for 3 is potentially fine, but it also has disturb, and it's going to actually get you a 2/1 flying looter. So every time it attacks, you draw and discard. That card seems really strong. I'm going to sign off on that. Yeah, 4 mana out of the graveyard to get a 2-power flyer that gives you that extra looting every turn. So in limited, generally your pool is going to have in between 16 and 18 lands. 17 is very popular. But let's say that you're on 17 lands and your deck is going to operate well off of 5 lands. It's very possible that when you reach that point, from then on, you're going to be able to take those extra lands, get even more value by discarding them to an effect like this, turning extra lands into gas, making the difference in between winning and losing. That card, really strong. I feel like blue's really turning a corner here. Patrician Geist, 3 casting, cost 2/2, flyer. Other spirits you control get +1/+1. Spells cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. That's an interesting card. I know there's a lot of spirit decks out there in Commander that are definitely going to be excited to run this as an Anthem effect. That's also a spirit itself. And getting the one less to cast cards out of your graveyard could potentially create some combo situations as well. Phantom Carriage, 6 casting costs, 4/4 flyer. ETBs, you can search your library for a card with flashback, or disturb, put it into your graveyard. I mean, I think this card's totally fine for your pre-release. It's extra value, and yeah, that's going to be a problem card to handle. Your opponent's not going to be super happy to bounce it, as you're just going to be able to play it for even more value. Yeah, that's a little expensive, but I think that's an effect you're going to be happy with toward the top of your curve for your pre-release pool. Popit Stitcher. Not sure what Popits are. They look like some type of zombie puppet. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 2/2 zombie with decay. All right. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more creatures, you can transform it. So right off the bat, all your instants and sorceries are getting you 2/2 zombies. This is going to be really fun for people in Commander. Those 2/2 zombies could potentially be used to be sacrificed to get more mana to be able to play more instant sorceries. People are going to have a blast with this. Let's see what the backside is. A Popit Factory. Creature tokens you control lose all abilities and have a base power 3/3. Beginning of your upkeep may transform Popit Factory. Interesting. You can basically turn all of those decay zombies into 3/3s. Now that'll just be a static ability, so when it transforms, they will go back. So yeah, that's really interesting. Oh, you may transform them as well. You don't have to. So yeah, this is going to be constructed like Commander. People are going to have a lot of fun with this. At 3 mana, I don't know that Legacy necessarily finds a way to abuse this, but I mean, 2/2 zombies, that is no joke. Empty the Warren tokens generally don't attack that often. Like if you make a huge amount of empty tokens, usually it's just one attack step. So this, you don't need to make that many zombie tokens to win. I'm not saying it's a Monastery Mentor. That is making 2/2 zombies. All right, that's an interesting card. I'm not even saying it's like a young pyromancer, but yeah, enough. Revenge of the Drowned, 4 casting cost instant. Target creature, the owner puts it in the top or bottom of their library. You can create a 2/2 zombie for 4 casting cost investment. Yeah. Yep, that is a lot for that effect. Now, denying your opponent a card draw is actually pretty solid. That effect is underrated. Putting a creature on top of the library, if you're winning, drawing that same creature back, basically like denying them the draw for turn, which is brutal. The fact that they can put it on the top or bottom really kind of pulls this in the other direction for me. It's essentially just putting it on the bottom of their library, unless the card's so good that it's going to like win for them. And you're getting your decay zombie. Yeah, this one doesn't feel amazing. Putting stuff on top of the opponent's library also very interesting when there's a shuffle effect. So that's something to consider. But again, at 4 mana, that's not a nimble spell that you can slot in around a activation of a fetch land, for example, like one might do with Submerge. Respond to a fetch land, Terramorphic Expanse, Onslaught fetches, whatever they are, with putting a creature on top of the library, then it gets shuffled away, never to be seen again. Secrets of the Key, a 1 casting cost instant. Investigate, cast from your graveyard, instead investigate twice. So basically, you're looking at 3 mana to draw 1 card, with the flashback being a 8 mana investment to draw 2 more cards. So you get an Ancestral Recall for 11 mana? Yeah, I mean, certainly not vintage power level. I don't know that I actually want to dirtle around doing this in Limited, but perhaps there's some decks that people will have some fun with this. I know there are people that really enjoy making those blue tokens or treasure tokens. Would not surprise me if people have fun with that card, though it does not really look immediately usable for your pre-release. That type of dirtling is generally not where you want it. Shipwreck Sifters, 2 casting costs, 1/2. And enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. And whenever you discard a spirit card or a card with disturb, put a +1/+1 counter on it. That feels a little bit like a trap to me. The 1 mana, the 1 power, 2 casting cost cards. In your pre-release pool, there's a high probability that this card just totally craps out on you. In draft, it starts to get a little bit better. As you move more into Commander and Constructed, the consistency of a card like this greatly improves, but on the other side of that, the effect compared to the other things you can do in those formats is not overwhelming. So this one might just not have a home. Scav Wrangler, 2 casting cost, 2/1. Tap 3 untap creatures you control to tap target creature. I love this one. This one's great. This one's fantastic. So you've got a aggressive creature, 2 power for 2/1. You do want to see the backside of that be a little bit bigger, but you take what you got. And the fact that during your opponent's end step, you can tap down multiple creatures. So you can tap her and you can tap other creatures, meaning like if you have 6 creatures or 9 creatures, whatever it is, you're just tapping down their most dangerous attackers and potentially tapping down that last other potential defender and then swinging in for total lethal. That card is a dangerous one that's probably going to have to get dealt with. A land, kind of a gridlocked game, will eventually just get won by this type of card. Creatures that remove other creatures are generally amongst the best possible effects in Limited. So generally, creatures are how you're going to win the game. Creature removal is how you're going to stop your opponent from winning the game. And when you mix those two, is a really dangerous kind of double-pronged threat for your opponent that you can either win the game or hold on until reinforcements come. Sludge Monster, a 5 casting cost, 5/5 horror. I swear, like, this type of thing used to have a drawback. I'm doubting this will. When it ETBs, put a slime counter on up to 1 other target creature. Non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base toughness whenever it ETBs or attacks. So we've got the blob here, which is fun. It's just going to spread and turn everything into 2/2s and just kind of, I mean, I enjoy the flavor. I think that's a fine card for Limited. Getting rid of even just airbounding but what is the card? Earthcraft? Nope. I can picture it. Earthbind, I think it is. This is a card that just makes it so a creature loses flying. That's what's going to happen here. They're going to have 2 power creature in the air. Instead, it's on the ground where it's no good to anybody. And you've got this huge 5/5 that can attack and continue to just make their creatures unremarkable. And that's a card that you're going to be happy to sleeve up in your pre-release. You're going to want some color that's going to back it up with some type of removal. You don't want to be in a situation where your opponent's going to be able to just gang block this thing and finally get rid of it. That would certainly be disappointing. Spectral Adversary. If they triple block it and you can remove one of those tokens or one of those 2/2 creatures, leaving them with just 4 power, you get a 3-for-1. I mean, that's winning the game on the spot. Spectral Adversary, 2 casting cost, 2/1 flying flash. Loving that. That's really, really good for Limited. And when it enters the battlefield, you can pay 1 in the blue any number of times. And When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on the adversary. Then up to that many other target artifacts, creatures, and or enchantments phase out. Wow. Wow, talk about just like a blowout game ender. During your opponent's turn, you can be getting rid of all of their stuff and just striking in for lethal. Or if you just top deck it for turn, you can just main phase that, just swing in for lethal. That is a brutal card, something that's incredibly good on turn 2, but also late game. Look out, that is a game winner. Yeah, you're potentially going to go blue for this type of card. Startle, we're going to see 2 mana get you a card and giving -2/-0 to a creature and getting a decayed zombie. That's a lot of text, difficult to evaluate, probably fine, probably functions as a type of removal. A big question will be the utility of that zombie token with decayed. Chipping in for 2 one time is fine, but if you have some other effect, we've seen needing to sacrifice bodies or something along those lines, tapping the bodies for effects, that type of thing. Really, I think a lot of these decayed cards, the value is going to be determined by the utility of those zombie bodies, aside from just trying to go for that alpha strike final damage in the game. Storm Rider Spirit, flying, flash, 5 mana. What's not to like? Potential card advantage, popping in, blocking a 2/2 creature. A little risky, but there are times where that's going to be a clear path that will actually generate card advantage and stabilize the game for you. And yeah, there's nothing really to complain about this card at all, in my opinion. Solid of common that's going to show its face in many blue releases. Suspicious Stowaway. We've got a 2 casting cost, 1/1, can't be blocked, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you loot. And it is going to have Daybound on the front here, the backside. Seafaring Werewolf cannot be blocked. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you also draw a card. And all right. So you have an unblockable card drawing engine for 2 mana. Yeah, I'm down. Card's fine. 2 mana Ophidian. Sometimes it's hitting for 2. I'm liking it. I think that card's totally fine. Good flavor, too. Triska Decaphile. I am not going to lie. I definitely opened my mouth on this one online. So I learned a long time ago that people get very excited about spoiler season. Generally, the right play, having a conversation or a dialogue with somebody, is just kind of let them be excited about it. It's not really hurting anyone. It's not like they're going out and taking their IRA and emptying it to go buy Magic cards as an investment based off of a foolish idea. A lot of the time, the people that are the most exuberant are the most wrong. Also, the least receptive to hearing about it. And this was one of these instances where people were talking about this card seeing play in Vintage, which to me is comical. And I'm putting it online. I could be totally wrong. Maybe I just don't understand Vintage anymore because I haven't been playing that much. But to me, this is the ultimate win more concept. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. That is virtually identical to saying whenever you would deal 100 or more damage to your opponent, instead you win the game. It's like, I was going to win anyways. I had 13 cards in my hand. I am dunking on you. You couldn't stop me from getting to 13 cards. How am I going to lose? I mean, there may be some type of situations that I'm not aware of going on where you're not able to resolve things due to having some type of lock pieces or something, but I don't think that's the case. I think this is just hot garbage from a Vintage perspective, as there's just no way that you're ever going to make that happen where you wouldn't have won anyways. And the paying 4 mana to draw a card is not a very efficient use. I mean, you want to be resolving like a paradoxical outcome or something for 4 mana, not just simply drawing a card. So yeah, overall, not impressed with this card. For Vintage, shouldn't have to be said. Most of these cards are not being looked at through a Vintage lens whatsoever. It's very rare for a card to actually make an impact there. But I guess, what do kids say, yuck their yum or whatever. Like it was, I opened my mouth and I was like, this was a win more card, and the person did not understand it. One of the rare times that I interacted on Facebook. Uh, yep. So sorry if that was too upsetting to whoever I was talking to. They went on to delete everything. I think they may have come to their senses, but yeah, this one, don't expect it to be used with a paradoxical outcome to win the game. I actually think what may have contributed to it is a lack of understanding about the nuance of the rules. So this is a conditional trigger. So this says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. So conditional triggers work like this. They have to be true to trigger, and then when the trigger resolves, it has to be true in order for the effect to happen. So it's similar to Oath of Druids. If we have the same amount of creatures in play, well, I won't use an analogy. I'll just talk about this one precisely. If I don't have 13 cards at the beginning of my upkeep, this will not trigger. So I can't say untap, upkeep, trigger Triskaidekaphile. I apparently can't say it anyways. And then respond with a paradoxical outcome to get to exactly 13 cards in hand and then win the game, because the condition wasn't true at the beginning of the upkeep. So I think that might have contributed, and that's my guess, is what actually was happening is people just weren't sure of how the rules work. But either way, not going to be vintage playable. All right, we got Unblinking Observer at 2 mana. It's a 2/1, which seems totally fine as a kind of aggressive building block of your sealed pool. Generally, like I said, you're going to want those 2 power creatures to contest the board early. If you get out a couple of those and your opponent's just kind of dirtling, stuck, waiting for their 5th land or whatever, you're just going to absolutely run them over. So you do need to contest the board early, and that is typically how it's done. Here, however, this can kind of pivot into being a mana dork, as you can spend a blue from him for disturb costs or casting instants or sorceries. So that's actually an interesting card. I would suspect there's going to be some commander decks that also would potentially want to run him, as he's not quite as good as a mana rock in terms of acceleration, but there's a body attached to it, which in some cases does add some liability, but also potentially some extra value. A vivisection, 4 casting costs. As an additional cost, sack a creature, draw 3 cards. Been talking about how to use those zombie tokens to good effect. I mean, this would be probably one of the better ways a zombie could die, but 4 casting cost sorcery to draw 3 cards. If this was an instant, I would feel totally different about it. The ability to respond to removal with this would make it very, very spicy. But as it is, I don't imagine that I would play this in my pre-release pool, as I'm generally not going to want to take a turn off just to draw some cards, given how low the power level is of the general cards in the deck. So that's it for blue. We're going Wooburg here, so it's going to be white, blue, black next. So we will see you on the next one.